Hey guys! This video is going to talk to you about the Anglo Saxons, including their history, culture, language, and literature. For the past 3 days in school, you guys have been taking notes and making videos and watching videos to help you learn about the Anglo Saxons. This video is going to be kind of your last attempt at fully grasping all the information before you have to sit down and take a quiz. Now, for the Anglo Saxons, it's important to know that they're broken up into 3 different tribes, including the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Now, this ancient Britain that we're going to talk about is located up here in the northern part of the map. So let's take a closer look. Ancient Britain looked a lot like this, kind of like how modern Britain looks. Now, this land was up for grabs by a lot of people who constantly warred over it for a very long time. But at the beginning, it started with the Celts, who occupied ancient Britain and used it for farming and were a fairly peaceful people. But then, in 55 BC, the Romans came in and took over, led by Julius Caesar. After the Romans started to lose their power and they declined, that left Britain open for further invasion. That's when, in year 400, that's when the Germanic tribes came in. So these are the guys that we're going to focus on. Remember, it's the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Then after year 400, in year 800, the Vikings came in. And they pillaged and plundered and fought and destroyed their way through Britain, taking over most of the land. However, it doesn't end there. Then in 1060, the Norns, Scots, and Danish come in, and they start taking over different parts of Britain. So there's a lot of people fighting over Britain, but you don't have to remember all of them. The ones that we most want to focus on include the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes, which were Germanic tribes. So what does that mean if they're Germanic tribes? What that means is that they came from ancient Germany, and they arrived to different parts of Britain. So you can see that the Angles went to northern Britain, the Jutes went to southern Britain, and the Saxons went to middle Britain. And they occupied different locations and warred quite a bit with each other, but they never actually took over each other's lands. That's what the Vikings did. So, what is ancient Germany? This is ancient Germany. And Germany looks like this today. So that's where they came from, and they sailed to Britain looking for money and power. So when they arrived, they took over Britain. So this is an overview of what we just talked about. So first we have ancient Britain that began with the Celts. Then in 55, the Romans took over under the lead of Julius Caesar. When his power declined, then come in the Anglo-Saxons, the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes. And this happened in year 400. Now also, this led to a lot of important changes. In year 400, that's when the English language began. Also, that's when Anglo-Saxon culture, religion, and social order took over, and literary tradition began, which is why Beowulf came from this time period. So this is the first time that people were telling stories to each other, and those stories were being recorded. And all of this ends with the second Viking invasion in year 800. Now, let's talk more about ancient Britain, which lasts from year 2000 BC to 43 AD. So during this time, Britain was inhabited by the Britons, where Britain gets its name, and the Celtic people. They were farmers and hunters and fairly peaceful. Their society was organized into different clans, and these clans were ruled by tribal chieftains elected from the class of pagan priests. And these priests that elected these chieftains into power were known as Druids. So you can see even in this time period, they had a form of government, and it was fairly peaceful. Now, the peacefulness went away when the Romans invaded. So from 43 AD to 449 AD, the Romans ruled Britain under Claudius's rule. They brought their laws, culture, comforts, and Latin language to the land. The Celts who survived the invasion ultimately were Romanized. They stopped with their tribal disputes and then things became even more peaceful. Britons were converted to Christianity during this time period, just like the rest of the Roman Empire. And then, in the 5th century, the Roman occupation ends because Rome essentially falls, and that leaves Britain open for other people to come in. So this is when the Anglo Saxons come, the guys that we're focusing on for Beowulf. So between 4th and 5th century AD, they start showing up as the Romans gradually withdraw and leave Britain vulnerable. Over the next 100 years, Britons were invaded by seafaring Germanic invaders, and these tribes were known as the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, just like we talked about before. And this invasion forced a lot of natives who were living on the island to retreat to Wales, because these invasions were violent and very deadly, and people wanted to escape in order to save their lives. And now with all of this, the Old English period begins in 449. Now, with the Anglo-Saxon culture, we have Beowulf. So with Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxons brought legends about ancient German heroes and kings, like Beowulf. The warriors were celebrated in lays, which are another word for songs that were sung at feasts by gleemen or scots. The lays were accompanied by the harp or lyre, and songs were composed orally for entertainment, but also to keep history alive. Just think of it, in this time period, people didn't write down history. Therefore, songs and stories were really the only way to pass history on from one person to another. But they also used these historical stories as entertainment. Kings would be entertained, and they would entertain their friends in mead halls, named for the mead drink that they had from fermented honey. So, in the mead hall, you'd have gleemen, scots, and bards singing and telling stories. And stories that they might share include Beowulf, which is what we're going to read. So as we read Beowulf, you can imagine it being originally told in a mead hall that looks like this. Now, Anglo-Saxon society was about more than just drinking mead in a mead hall and listening to stories about ancient heroes from Germany. They also had a fairly complex societal system with different classes. So one of the first classes included warriors known as earls or thanes. And it was these warriors' jobs to protect the king that they were devoted to. And the kings were chosen by Witan, which was a council of elders. Now, there was also a class of freemen below the kings and the warriors, known as freemen, and they were called churls. Now, below the churls, there were slaves who are known as thralls. And women didn't have a lot of power, and they were in a class all their own called peace weavers. So remember, we have the thanes, who are the warriors, the Witans, who select the king, and the churls, who are freemen, but below the thanes and Witans and kings. Then we have the peace weavers, who are the ladies, and the thralls, who are the slaves. Now, in addition to the society, the social class, there was also religious beliefs. Now, before Christianity comes to Britain, the Anglo-Saxons were considered pagans, and they were polytheistic, which means they had many gods. So every human life was in the hands of fate, and fate was controlled by the gods. What that meant is that it didn't matter what you did, any decision you made, the gods decided what would happen to you. And some of the gods that they worshipped included two, the god of war in the sky, Woden, the chief of the gods, and Freya, Woden's wife. And these names we still have around today because they inspired the names of the days of weeks that we have, including Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. So for instance, Monday was named after the moon, Moon Day, Monday. Tuesday was named after the god of war, named Tiwa, or Tuesday. Then we have Wednesday, or Woden's Day, which is named after the god Woden. Then we have Thor's Day, or Thursday, which is named after the god Thor. Then we have Friday, or Freya's Day, which is named after the goddess Freya. Then we have Saturday, which is named after Saturn, who's actually a Roman god. And then Sunday, which you could probably already guess, is named after the sun. So these pagan religions and these pagan gods were followed for a good part of the Anglo-Saxon rule. However, all of England was converted to Christianity upon the arrival of Augustine in 597 AD. Augustine slowly began converting different kings, especially King Ethelbert of Kent, to Christianity, and the rest of England soon followed. Monasteries were built, and then by 731 AD, Christianity was well rooted in Britain, with most of the pagan religions falling to the wayside. Now, how this Christian religion was recorded and also passed on was through the scribes. The scribes lived in monasteries, and they produced books written by hand. These books were usually religious in nature and focused on saints' lives and their sermons. Now, while they were writing, much of the knowledge and information was still being passed on through oral literature, storytelling, and also songs. Since most of the population didn't know how to read or write, oral information was still really important. Now, because of these Christian scribes, however, Anglo-Saxon culture was recorded for us today. A lot of the stories and songs have died out and fallen to the wayside, but that written information has survived until today. Now, within these writings, you would see a lot of Anglo-Saxon themes, including heroism and kingship. This is going to be incredibly important in Beowulf when we read it. And the heroism and kingship talks about the relationship between kings and their warriors called thanes. There's also rearguild, which means man price, or the retribution for the death of one's family member. This was taken very seriously. If a family member died, it was your responsibility to take retribution against the person who killed him. Now, themes continued. There's also weird, or fate, which controlled one's destiny. In this time period, like I said before, people didn't think that their actions led to their futures. They believed that the gods decided what happened to them. Also, there was the fear of exile. It was the cost of being abandoned or apart from one's tribes and society. And this would be a really big problem. If you were exiled, you were almost certain to die because you would face wild animals in the night, freezing cold temperatures, and also just the random warrior who could come by and kill you because he was trying to take over another area. So, that is all the information that you need to know about the Anglo-Saxons. If you understand this information, then you are set for tomorrow. Thanks for watching.